Welcome back to another episode of Divine Journey 2. In the last episode, we got access to Astral Sorcery, and in between episodes, I went ahead and moved down our little Starlight Infuser down here, and I also moved our Iridescent Altar down here, and I also set up the little structure here for our Collector Crystal. So now we have full starlight even when it's daytime. So the plan for today is to get into chapter 24, which is Galacticraft. But before we do that, we're going to sidetrack a bit. And if we come back into chapter 23, we got access to the mob loot fabricators here. And I've gone ahead and gone through all the various different recipes that this little structure can do. And I determined that for right now, there's 8 recipes that we want. So the first one we want is the autocaster here for all the different Thaumcraft crystals. Then the item magnet for the different lightning craft drops. Then the sanguine pedestal, not for the vengeance essence necessarily, but for the evilcraft blood. Then the stabilized end crystal for all the different end drops. The Twilight Clock for the different Divine RPG drops. Weak Blood Shard for Life Essence as well as the Demonic Will. The Triskelion Amulet for the different Bewitchment drops. And finally, the Life Crystal for the different Abyssal Craft drops. Alright, I've built our first out of 8 mob loot fabricators here. And this one we're going to use for all the blood magic drops. So if we put in a weak blood shard here, and I think we need to put an orb in here as well. In a few seconds, is this unbound? Oh. Should start getting our Demon Will and weak blood shards. Or I think this one puts Demon Will into the chunk, I believe. And yes, the Demonic Will go directly into the chunk, so we can actually get rid of both of these rituals here, as they're redundant at this point. Now that we have near infinite blood essence, as long as that mob factory is running, we also don't need a Well of Suffering ritual anymore. The second mob setup I've made is for the Evilcraft drops, and I'm just extracting the blood into a black hole tank for the 2 blood infusers, and then I'm just storage drawing the vengeance essence. Back to Galacticraft. To actually progress, we're going to have to first make our galactic machine frames, and to do that, we're going to need some of our galactic ingots that we made at the end of last episode, alongside some black iron frames, as well as tough galactic plating, which is an alloy smelter recipe of iridium, nickel, and mithril plates. I've gone ahead and set up some compactors for those 3 plates, and I also set up an alloy smelter here for the actual tough galactic plating. And our first Galacticraft machine we're going to make is the Circuit Fabricator. We can start making some Galacticraft wafers. And to make our basic wafers, we need a Rune of Gluttony, 2 silicon, 1 quantum disk, and 1 rainbow tablet. For advanced wafers, it's a quantum disk, 1 rainbow tablet, 2 infused silicon, and 1 Rune of Lust. We also need our 2 tiers of solar wafers. The first tier is a quantum disk, a rainbow tablet, 2 electrosilicon, and 1 Rune of Envy. And the other tier takes a quantum disk, a rainbow tablet, 2 energized silicon, and 1 Rune of Greed. Next up, we're going to make our compressor, and we're going to upgrade it immediately to the electric version. Also, since we now have access to Galacticraft materials, we can make the RF lightning generator. And if we come to our little Lightningcraft infusion multi-block, if we replace the Mystic Lightning cell with the RF lightning generator, it'll now quintuple the speed of this rather than just doubling it. Right, I've gone ahead and set up this little Ludicrate to Star Metal Ore automation. And the way I have this set up is just auto placers down there is what actually places the Ludicrate ore. Then I have some scanners here scanning for the Star Metal ore. Then on the relays here, I have it on inverted scaled mode, which means it'll output a signal when this isn't outputting a signal. And then all these auto breakers are on deactivation, and these relays are on redstone output. And we're probably going to keep this set up like this till we get Star Metal seeds. Alright, now that we have our compressed ingots somewhat automated, I put in a little recipe for the first heavy-duty plate, and we can now request it. Next up, we're going to need a few single solar modules, and we can turn those simple solar modules into the full solar panel. Now that we have access to heavy plating, we can also make our NASA workbench. And in this pack, there's actually been a little change. You can't just go to planets all willy-nilly. You actually have to discover them using a satellite. So we also have to make our satellite builder. I gathered up enough solar panels as well as basic satellite modules to make our satellite. To actually launch our rocket, we're going to need 25 satellite rocket launch pads. Fuel our satellite as well as our rockets, we're going to need some oil, so we're going to have to make a refinery. And to actually load the fuel into the rockets and satellites, we're going to need a fuel loader. To actually breathe on the planets we're going to travel to, we're going to have to make some oxygen gear. So the first part of that we're going to make is the oxygen mask. Next up, we need our oxygen concentrator. And if we combine that with our stellar chest plate, heavy duty plates, and advanced wafers, we can make our oxygen gear. We also need our parachute. To actually be able to hear sounds on the different planets and such, we can make a little frequency module. To actually breathe on the planets that we're going to travel to, we're going to have to make a oxygen collector to collect oxygen from the atmosphere, and to actually put that into a tank, we need to make an oxygen compressor. Make our oxygen tanks, starting with the light version. Then we're going to upgrade them to medium oxygen tanks. And finally, we can upgrade it to the heavy oxygen tank. I've gone ahead and set up our oxygen collector and compressor, and I just hooked up some fluid pipes so the oxygen can travel between the two. But to actually fill up our tank, all you have to do is put it in the oxygen compressor and wait. Once we reach the planets, to actually progress to the next rocket tier, we're going to have to find dungeons that have little schematics in them, and we can either search for them manually, or we can make the creative dungeon locator. To actually control our satellites in space, we need a little satellite controller, and alongside the controller, we also need a communication dish keycard. To actually craft our satellite rocket, we're going to need a nose cone, 4 rocket fins, Tier 1 rocket engine, and if we come to our NASA workbench, and come to the second tab, we can put in all the parts for our satellite rocket. To actually discover the planets, we also need a telescope. And finally, to be able to fuel up our rockets and satellites, we're going to have to make our next modular machinery multi-block, the liquid crafter, as that is the only way to get the Galacticraft oil, so we can refine that into the actual fuel. The liquid crafter requires one machine controller, one big energy input hatch, one reinforced item input, one reinforced item output, two reinforced fluid input hatches, two reinforced fluid output hatches, 14 fortified glass, 8 machine vents, and finally 63 reinforced machine casings. I've gone ahead and built up our little Liquidcraft structure here, and this is going to get moved eventually, but for right now, it's going to stay here. But to actually craft our Galacticraft oil, we have to put in one empowered oil, or one bucket of empowered oil, one bucket of tree oil, and if we put in a basic wafer, we should get it in a few seconds. Get our silicon and our oil. If we come over to the refinery and put our oil bucket in a few seconds, we should get our fuel. There's a few more steps we need to perform before launching our satellite rocket into space. The first one being, we need to link our communication dish keycard to our actual communication dish. And if we click it and link it, and if we place it in the satellite controller, we'll obviously not research anything because we don't have a satellite launched yet. Put in a basic satellite into the little cargo bay of this rocket, and give the fuel loader some fuel. The fuel has hit 100%, so let's launch our satellite. After a few seconds, we got the little message that it's been launched into space, and we can now start processing our moon research. While the moon is currently getting researched, we can make our rocket parts for our tier 1 rocket, and that includes 1 nose cone, 4 rocket fins, a tier 1 rocket engine, and 8 heavy duty plates. And if we come to our NASA workbench and put in all the parts, we have our tier 1 rocket. After a bit of time, the moon research has been completed, and now it's going to research Mars. But if we come over to our little telescope here and put in the research paper, we'll give it some power. In a few seconds, we should be able to go to the moon. Alright, I think I've gathered up everything for our moon trip here. The quest said to bring a builder for the different moon ores that we're probably going to get. So yeah, let's take off, I guess. And since we discovered the moon, if we click on the Earth, we can launch to the moon. And in a few seconds, we should land on the moon. Now that we're on the moon, the way we're going to get back and forth instead of launching a rocket up and going back between the Earth is I just made a little mechanism teleporter. So that's going to be our little way of transportation back and forth. And I think as long as we have the chunk loaded, we'll be able to travel between dimensions. And since we're on the moon, we're also going to set up our builder for cheese ore as well as the sapphire, I believe. Yeah, sapphire. So we're going to do our default 512 by 256 by 512. And if we just give it power and storage, we should start getting our ores in a few seconds. And the last thing we need to do on the moon is actually look for our dungeon. And since we made the dungeon finder, it should be pretty simple. Alright, after a bit of a journey, we found the dungeon. And here's the boss room. And let's see if we get lucky with the Tier 2 rocket schematic. There we go. I actually looked in the quest book, and there's one more thing we need to do. We actually have to find one of these little abandoned facilities here. And if we go through it, there should be some key fragments in the three rooms somewhere. I've gone ahead and cleared out the room so we can fight our highly evolved zombie. Now that we have our moon cheese, we can make some cheesy wafers. To unlock the next tier of rocket, all we have to do is come to our NASA workbench and come to the last page and unlock the schematic. And before we end the episode, we're going to set up the other mob loot fabricators that I wanted to. And the next one we're going to set up is the little one for all the Thaumcraft items. And to do that, we have to make the Autocaster, as that's the little catalyst. And we needed the Void Seer's Pearl, but I couldn't craft that because I needed the normal item input, since there was 7 input items. And now we can also craft our Void Seer's Caster's Gauntlet with a Void Metal Plate, a Thermometer, 2 Diabolical Veins, a Void Seer's Pearl, a V Resonator, 2 Enchanted Fabric, 2 Sodium Ingots, and 1 Thaumium Caster's Gauntlet. And with that, we can make the Autocaster finally. Alright, I've gone ahead and set up the little structure here, and I'm just extracting on all the 6 item outputs into a drawer controller. And I have, each crystal has its own little slot. I just have void upgrades on all the drawers. And with that, I think I'm going to end this episode here. So yeah, thanks for watching.